Now let's have a look at some trees in the middle distance. These have got to look considerably further away, so the first thing to bear in mind is that they should be smaller. Secondly, they should have less detail on them. Obviously, if something is nearer to you, you perceive more detail than you do with something further away. The colour has got to be cooler, so we shall add a bit more blue to the green, so it's a cooler colour. And the tone has got to be just that little bit lighter than the strongest colours in the foreground tree. I'm going to start first of all by mixing a mid-green again with Oriolin and a touch of ultramarine. Bearing in mind it's got to be a little bit weaker than in the foreground tree, so I've added a bit more water to it. Then I want a darker green, so we start with some Oriolin again. Good idea when you're mixing greens to always use the yellow first, because the blue is the strongest colour. It's easier to judge the colour correctly by adding the stronger colour second. And I'm adding that, so I get a fairly dark green, but a bit lighter than on the foreground tree and quite a bit bluer. Remember, blue is a cool colour. So I'm going to wash the brush out, and then with that mid-green I'm going to start by using the very tip of the brush and just get an approximate sort of shape for the tree. Remember, this has got to have quite a bit less detail than the foreground tree we've just done. Okay, pick up some more paint. Good idea to vary the size of them as well so they look more natural. I'm using the same large brush as I used for the other tree. This helps you not to put too much detail in, but I'm using the tip of it so I've got more control. And let's put a third one in. See how the point of the brush suggests the edges of the branches. Now picking up some of the dark bluey green. And we'll say the light's coming from the left, so we'll add some of this to the right hand side of these tree shapes. Just keep making sure that I just use the very tip of the brush so I've got more control over it. Okay, now I'm going to clean that brush out, and then straight away now I'm going to start painting some trunks and a few indications of little branches, and for that I'm changing to the liner writer brush. I'm going to mix a dark brown by taking some Oriolin and Rose Madder to first of all give me a nice bright orange colour. Touch more water in it. Then when I've got the bright orange, I'm going to darken it into a brown with the ultramarine blue. Now this it needs to be a fairly strong brown because with trees like this, the trunk's going to be in quite heavy shadow. Okay, so we've got a good brush full of paint, and let's start by painting from the ground upwards. Always important with tree trunks that you paint them from the ground upwards, leading into the foliage so the colour softens into that paint which hasn't dried yet. That's quite important that you do it quickly enough before the previous paint dries. A few indications. This is a lovely brush, the liner writer. It's got a really fine point to it so you can do really fine lines with it. Okay, one on the third tree. Again, just the very tip of the brush to suggest a few branches coming off into the foliage and getting lost amongst all that foliage. Then to finish it off, we'll put a bit of foreground in. I'm going to take some Oriolin again and a little touch of ultramarine, just a little touch this time, so it's a fairly bright colour. And paint that along in a straight line, just touching the bottoms of those tree trunks, just to plant the trees down on the ground. And then with the very tip of the brush, I'm going for some of that dark bluey green I've just used on the trees. I need to give the field just a moment to start to dry. You're looking for a period where the paper has just started to lose its shine. That's about the right time to just use the very tip of the brush to suggest a bit of shadow from those trees. Okay, and that's those finished. So finally, let's have a look at distant trees. Obviously these have even less detail, and in fact it's a good idea not to draw any shapes at all, as you don't want to see any pencil lines so far back into a painting. What I'm going to do first of all, I've drawn a horizon line across the paper, and I'm going to mix some colour for the middle distance and foreground. I'm going to start with a nice bright green with Oriolin and just a touch of ultramarine. Then for the foreground, so that it looks nearer, to create this feeling of distance, I'm mixing a darker green. Oriolin again. And this time a bit more ultramarine to make it darker. So starting with the lighter bright green, I'm bringing this carefully along the bottom of that pencil line. Neat horizontal strokes. And then after I've painted down about an inch or so, I'm converting to the darker green. You can see that the reason we've got the dark green ready is so that we can put it on straight away before the lighter green's dried, and they just blend in. So let's have a look now that that foreground is dried at putting in these distant trees. Timing is crucial for this. Whenever you want something with a soft edge, a bit of wet in wet, you do have to think about the timing in watercolour. So what I'm going to do before we put any brushes to paper is mix some colour. So I'm going to start by mixing a wash for the sky. Just a fairly thin wash of ultramarine blue. I need to make sure I've got enough of it because I'm going to cover quite a large area of the paper to give me plenty of room to work. Now for the distant trees, I'm going to start with a sort of purple colour by taking ultramarine blue again. This has got to be a thicker consistency than the sky. That's very important that you do make this colour. You don't need anything like as much of it, and that it is important that you make it a thicker consistency. And then I'm going to add to that some rose madder. Give me a sort of purple colour. That's okay, but it is a little bit strong, and I'm going to use just a tip of the brush dipped in the Oriolin, just a little touch of Oriolin to grey it slightly. So let's start with the large brush, and I'm going to coat the whole of the sky area with clean water, bringing that right down with even horizontal strokes to the horizon line. Try and get a nice neat line where it meets the horizon line. It does make the next bit easier. And then immediately we'll get a brush full of the ultramarine wash and just drop that in just to create a simple wet in wet sky. Concentrate the colour a bit more at the top and then add a bit of water to the wash so that it's paler towards the horizon. That always helps to create a feeling of distance if your sky is paler towards the horizon and darker at the top. Now timing is quite crucial here. If I go in too early with that purpley colour for the distant trees, it'll spread like mad and we'll lose the shape altogether. Too late and it'll get a hard edge. A good tip is to watch for the shine going off the paper. Just as the shine starts to go off the paper, that's the right time to go in with that next colour. So I'm going to get a good brush full of it ready. And you can be tentative at first and just touch the paper with the tip of the brush and see what happens. If it spreads too much, it's too early. But that's just softening nicely, giving me a sort of rounded shape. Try and keep a nice neat line where this meets the green. Try and vary it as well. Let's put some different shapes and sizes in. If it's too uniform, it doesn't look realistic. Some larger trees. There's some smaller ones, almost like bushes. Let's get that a little bit larger. Keep working with using the tip of the brush so you've got more control over it. Just working along. And then I'm going to pick up that darker green that I used in the foreground and just touch a little bit of that in to the bottom of it. So the colour is a little bit denser, a little bit darker at the base of the trees. Again, just use the very tip of the brush so you can control what you're doing with the colours. We've got one area there where the paper was a little bit drier, so the trees aren't soft at the top. Now if that happens, it's easy to put it right. I'm cleaning the brush, I'm rubbing most of the moisture off on a piece of tissue, so the brush isn't wet through but it's just damp, and I'm going to just soften the edge with this damp clean brush. Clean it again, take most of the moisture off so it's not wet through. If it's wet through, you just flood it and spoil it, and I can just use the tip of the brush that's nice and damp and soften that edge. And there we have three types of trees. Trees in the foreground, the middle distance and the distance. But it's not just about the technique for painting the trees. It's these various techniques we have to employ to create that feeling of depth. Remember, if it's in the foreground, it's going to have more detail. As it gets further away, it's going to have less detail and be smaller. Remember, the colour is lighter and cooler, and the tone is a bit paler all the time as it's getting further away. And those really distant trees, they have that soft misty edge. That also creates the effect of distance.
Now available on DVD. Try these techniques yourself at home whenever you wish. Today's workshop is part of the Watercolour As If by Magic Beginners course. 6 fantastic 20-minute workshops on DVD, now available to order from the Painting and Drawing channel. For further information and to order your copy, go to www.paintingdrawingchannel.com.